So I will go ahead now and bring us to our main event here, which is a glimpse of Cowlitz County postal history with Ted Gruber, who has researched and collected postal history for almost 50 years, at times specializing in Nevada, Utah, and now Cowlitz County. He has authored or co-authored about 24 books and journal articles on various aspects of Western postal history and has served as a contributor to other published works, including the esteemed Cowlitz Historical Quarterly from last fall. He is currently writing a book about Cowlitz County postal history, which will include a postmark catalog documenting all known postmarks from the county. So with that, I'd like to give us a warm welcome to Ted Gruber, who is going to share his knowledge about our local postal history with us this evening. Take it away, Ted.
All right, thanks, Joseph. Much appreciated here. So let Danielle can start up the presentation, and there'll be a couple of points where we'll do some audience interaction, audience participation here, disguised as a pop test, so that should be fun. All right, so as the title indicates, I chose the name A Glimpse of Cowlitz County Postal History. There's my name and an email where you can reach me if you have questions that I don't answer after the presentation. Please feel free to contact me at any time and I'll do my best to answer that. Next. All right, and as promised, we'll start off with a pop quiz. So there are 10 independent post offices still operating in Cowlitz County. How many can we name? So open it up.
And at this point, you are free to unmute yourself to go ahead and answer, or you can throw in any answers into the chat box.
Kalama.
That's one.
Longview.
Well, that's the easiest one. Okay.
Kelso.
There you go. That's three. We're 30% done.
Castle Rock.
I'm sorry?
Castle Rock.
Castle Rock. That's 4.
Tootle.
Tootle is 5.
Carol's.
Carol's is 6.
Somebody say Woodland.
Not yet. That's 7.
Tootle.
We already had Tootle. We got 3 to go.
Riderwood.
Riderwood is right. We have 2 to go. They're close together. Reasonably. Think south.
Oh, south.
Woodland.
Ariel.
We had Woodland,
Yeah.
but you can get there from Woodland reasonably easy.
Not Ariel.
Ariel is 1, and go a little farther up the road, and somebody said Cougar.
We got Cougar in the
Cougar,
chat
so
box.
that is it. Very good. You all get an A for the day. Okay, next. All right, and here's our answer, of course, and we got all 10 of them. All right, I think the next quiz we'll have toward the end of the presentation might be a bit more challenging. All right, next. Okay, and here there are 45 post offices operating in what is now Cowlitz County, and they're all listed below with their dates of operation. Postmarks are known from 42 of the 45. The 3 that are unknown are Davenport, Lower Cowlitz, and Olaqua, spelled with an O-L-O as opposed to an O-L-E. In the above table there, the dash means that the office operated continuously. So Caples, for example, operated continuously from 1891 to 1909, whereas Carrollton operated intermittently between 1871 and 1950.
Ted, I think we just got muted accidentally. Sorry.
I did. Yeah, I saw it. So did y'all hear what I said about Carrollton? No. Okay, I'll just go over this again here. A dash such as Caples 1891 to 1909 means that the office operated continuously during that period. A slash, as indicated for Carrollton, mean the office operated intermittently between 1871 and 1950. Okay, next. So here's a postal route map from 1883. These were prepared by topographers from the Post Office Department, and we're going to look at 3 of these. And this one, as you might imagine, is the most primitive. Note that it shows the Northern Pacific Railroad going north from Kalama, which was the southern terminus before it went across the river over to Gobel at that time. All of the post offices are either right on the Northern Pacific Railroad or the Cowlitz River there, or on the Columbia River. And also the post office, postal route maps were not known for their accuracy. Their intent was to show one post office's position relative to another and the distance between them. Martin's Bluff down there toward the south bottom of the map's bottom center, there's a circle with a slash through it. That means that that place one time had a post office, but currently the office was discontinued. The county boundary on the south of this map is wrong. It should be along the North Fork of the Lewis River. And Pekin's position down there is also wrong. It should be, it's at the southernmost end tip of Cowlitz County there. If you drew a line kind of between Pekin and St. Helens, Oregon, and looked at the lower curve of the S, that's about where Pekin would be. It's right on the Lewis River. So next, please. And you can see in 20 years, postal route maps have developed quite a lot. There's a lot more information on this one. It shows rivers and even down to like smaller rivers and creeks. It shows the frequency, which is color coded. So on this one, a line between two post offices means that mail was carried between those two offices 6 times per week. The orange line means twice per week. The dashed line means a special supply. And that basically means that the office was not on any established or created postal route, but there was some contractor that could be procured by the local postmaster to carry mail between one or more post offices. Additionally, I don't know how well it shows up here, but like if you look between Toutle and St. Helen up there, the orange line, at Toutle, there are 2 vertical bars, and at St. Helen end, there are 1. The 2 vertical bars mean that that is the start of the postal route, and the 1 vertical bar means that's the end. Of course, it would then go back the other direction, but all of them had an official start and an end. So this means that the route was controlled out of the Toutle post office. And as you can also see by this time, compared to 20 years back when the offices were located along the Cowlitz River or just the NPRR, Northern Pacific Railroad, and the Columbia River, we now have some offices in the northern part of the county, Silver Lake, Toutle, Sightly, Litho, and St. Helen. And then down along the Lewis River, we have Ariel and Yale. Okay, next. Okay, and in 1925, they decided, well, by this time, we don't really need all these creeks and rivers. And here's another postal route map, and you can see that we've picked up a few more offices. On this map, a post office is indicated with a circle. Up in the upper right corner there, we've got Elk Creek with a triangle. That means that's a discontinued post office. And it also shows the distances between them. And I should point out that the lines between the post offices are not the direct or the exact route. They just show the relationship between the two. So to get from Kalama to Pigeon Springs, for example, down there at the bottom, you wouldn't take that dotted line, but you would go up along the Kalama River. So it's just to show the relationship between the post offices. Okay, next. So this is a graph of the number of post offices that have operated in Cowlitz County at any one time. Currently, there are 10, as we saw by our quiz that you all aced. And this distribution is quite typical of most states, whereas the number of post office peaked in a given area, either a state or a county, most often peaked in the first decade of the 20th century, 1900 to 1910. And from then would go steadily downhill. We'll talk about some of the reasons later why this is, but in Cowlitz County, the most post offices that were operating at one time is 26 of them for a couple months in 1902. And since 1940, we can see it's pretty stable. The dot right to the left of the 1940 line is the discontinuance of the Ostrander post office. And the one farther right in 1985 is discontinuance of Silver Lake post offices. So we've only lost 2 post offices in the last 80 years. Okay, next. Where do we get the dates for the postmasters? Well, the original source for this was what's called the Records of Appointments of Postmasters. Those are maintained by clerks in the Post Office Department in Washington, D.C., and it shows postmaster appointment dates, order dates to discontinued post offices, and then starting about 1900, the effective discontinuance dates. Postmaster appointment dates were long accepted as the date the office was established, although that is simply the date that the postmaster was appointed to the post office, and that the operations of the post office began somewhat later, anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, and in some cases even longer than that. The order date to discontinue post office is the date that it was decided to discontinue that office for whatever reason. And then, like I said, starting about 1900, they would have an effective date. So the office might be discontinued if, say, the order was issued April 4th to discontinue the office on April 30th of that same year. Most of the earlier postal history books and post office listings would strictly use the records of appointments of postmasters because that was the only data that was available at the time. The Postal Bulletin was a daily publication. It's now published, I think, every 2 weeks. And it was published by the Post Office Department starting in 1880 until about 1942. It went into a lot of detail about the establishment and discontinuance of post offices, appointments of postmasters, mail routes, how offices were supplied, and the like. It had order dates to establish and discontinue post offices. So instead of just the date that the postmaster was appointed, it would have the date that the office actually became effectively established starting about 1917. So you might say the postmaster was appointed on April 5th. The office would begin operations or be formally established on April 15th, for example. And then starting in the mid 1880s, the Postal Bulletin would list the discontinued dates for this, just like the postmaster appointments did starting in about 1900. The Postal Bulletin was not readily accessible until the last 10 years or so. It is now digitized and online. Is available. That is a private site that maintains all issues through 2016. And so some of the dates that I'll be providing for offices, if you're familiar with Boardman's Washington Post Office's book and other similar books, the dates that I give might differ slightly, but that's because they are obtained through the Postal Bulletin instead of the less accurate records of appointments of postmasters. But for those early offices before the Postal Bulletin, typically the appointment of a postmaster represents the only data that we have to know when an office was established, so we typically use that. Okay, next. So now we'll begin the main tour here, talking about all 45 Cowlitz County post offices in the order they were established. Next. Okay. Monticello was the first office established in what's now Cowlitz County. It was established in 1850 while this area was part of Oregon Territory. So I don't mean that it was established on the Oregon side of the Columbia and then moved into Washington. On the contrary, until March 2, 1853. So yesterday was Washington Territorial Day. This area was part of Oregon Territory. And so the office was established while in Oregon. And Monticello is located about 3 miles south of Kelso on the west bank of the Cowlitz River. It was the first seat of Cowlitz County and before it moved to Freeport in 1865. Now I'll point out that this cover is the collective name, I should define, for an envelope or postcard bearing a cancellation. So collectors just use the term cover, even though technically a cover represents an envelope. They use it interchangeably for an envelope or postcard. So if I say cover, you can assume either one. This cover bears what's called a manuscript postmark. Now, in the early days, until the early 1900s, actually, smaller post offices were not supplied postmarking devices. If a postmaster wanted one, he had to procure them locally. Well, many postmasters chose not to do that, to spend the money to do so, so they would just use manuscript postmark. And this is very common among offices, or in earlier post offices and smaller post offices. Okay, next. Here's a later cover from Monticello, and this is actually quite a bit scarcer than the earlier manuscripts. And that's because Monticello was devastated by some Cowlitz River flooding several times in the 1860s. And by this time this was mailed, there weren't a lot of people remaining in Monticello. The county seat had already been moved to Freeport, and you can see the office was discontinued less than 2 years later. Next. The next office established in Cowlitz County, again while in Oregon Territory, is Oak Point. And this Oak Point is on the Columbia River at the mouth of Mill Creek, about 14 miles west of Longview. And this envelope or cover bears the earliest postmark from what is now Cowlitz County, and it dates from either 1853 or 1854. And let's take a look at how we know that. Next. So some key dates here. The Oak Point office, as we said, was established February 18, 1851, while part of Oregon Territory. And as I also mentioned a little bit ago, Washington Territory was created from the Oregon Territory on March 2nd, 1853. So we know it has to be after 1853. The postal rates of July 1851 established a rate of 6 cents per half ounce for letters traveling over 3,000 miles. And this letter, even though it went back east, it went around Cape of Good Hope, or I'm sorry, Cape Horn, southern tip of South America. It might have gone across the Panama. It was supposed to be via Nicaragua, but most of that mail went by ship around the Horn, as they say. Then in 1855, rates were raised to 10 cents per half ounce for letters traveling over 3,000 miles. So with that information in mind, next, we can see the WT postmark means it cannot be earlier than March 2nd, 1853. And the page 6 marking means it cannot be later than April 1st, 1855, because by that time the rate would have been 10 cents. So the only two November 1 dates are from 1853 and 1854 within that period. Now, I'll also mention here, this is what's called a stampless cover. First United States adhesive postage stamps were issued in 1847, and they were distributed to larger post offices, primarily in the East, though there are some Western usages known. The next issue of stamps was 1851, and these were distributed to more offices, but still in limited supply to smaller offices, and some offices, especially remote offices, not at all. So the postmaster would just give his annotation, page 6. That indicates that the patron came in and gave him 6 cents, and this letter went on its way. Next. Here's another cover from Oak Point, and this cover bears 3 of the 1851 1-cent stamps. It's the earliest use of stamps from what is now Cowlitz County. Next. And here is what's called a postmaster free frank. One of the privileges that postmasters had was that they could send mail, either personal or business mail, for free by just giving it what's called a frank. And basically, they just have to sign it. So Alex Abernethy, not Abernathy like the creek, but Abernethy, so that somewhere that got anglicized along the way here. He was the first postmaster of Oak Point, and he served from 1851 until I think 1880, might be 1881. So he was postmaster for a long time. So he sent this letter down to Oregon City, and it didn't cost him anything because he was postmaster. So he had a little free hand stamp there and signed his name, and off it went. Next. Okay, the next post office established in Cowlitz County was the first post office established while the area was part of Washington Territory, was Pekin. And Pekin is about 3 miles south of Woodland on the north bank of the Lewis River. It operated in 3 periods. No postmarks are known from the first or third periods. Those are fairly shorter periods. All known examples are from the 1861 to 1883 period. Next. Castle Rock. We all know where Castle Rock is, but I bet you didn't know that between 1895 and 1930, the name of the post office was actually one word. Why was this done? Well, in the mid-1890s, the post office department started on, somebody came up with the bright idea that we need to simplify and standardize post office names. They would be simple names. For example, an office that ended in B-U-R-G-H, the H was dropped, so it ended in B-U-R-G. Smaller towns like Empire City, Nevada was shortened to just Empire, Nevada. And one of the things that was done is that offices that were 2 words were condensed into a single word. So this is still from the 2-word period here. We'll show an example later from the 1-word period. But such changes were only done when there was a change in postmaster. So Oak Point did not get changed to 1 word, even though it was active in the 1895 era when this change was made in Castle Rock, because they didn't have a postmaster change. So all the time it was officially 2 words. Next. Davenport. No examples are known from Davenport. This is, in fact, I'm questioning, given how short this office operated, as if it even operated at all. There is anecdotal evidence that it did. It's on the Columbia River at or near the present site of Kalama. Next. What did I do here? Can you all still see that? It shrunk on my screen. I think hold on.
Should still be large, I believe, for most.
Yeah, I'll just assume the problems. I clicked something, I'm not sure what here.
I see it full.
You see it full? Okay, it's not full screen on mine. Danielle, help. What do I do?
I can stop sharing and restart right
No,
from where we are and see if that
it's all
changes
right.
it.
We'll just keep going here because it's reasonably large on my screen. As long as y'all can see it full screen, that's fine. Let me try one thing here. That didn't help any. Okay, well, I'm sorry, I'll just continue. Freeport was on the Cowlitz River north of Monticello. It's now within the Longview city limits. It was the county seat from 1865 until it was moved to Kalama in 1872. The post office was discontinued briefly in 1874 between the departure of Postmaster Olaf Olson and new Postmaster Victor Wallace. Olson again became postmaster in March 1876. Okay, next. Here's a later example from Freeport. You can see by this time, of course, they had decided that canceling covers and envelopes, applying manuscript postmarks was a lot of work, as you might imagine. So they did get a postmark, and this is the last postmark type documented from Freeport. Next. Olaqua, spelled with O-L-O instead of O-L-E. No examples are known, although the Olaqua with an E operated at the same general location later. And this office operated for less than a year in 1867 to 68, and it's one of the 3 offices for which no postmarks are known. Next. Martin's Bluff. Martin's Bluff is on the Columbia River, about 4 miles south of Kalama. The office operated in 3 periods. This is the only known territorial postmark and the earliest known postmark from Martin's Bluff. It dates from the 1868 to 79 period. Next. Here's a postmark from the 3rd period, 1905 to 16. This is called a Doan Type 3. And if you look carefully over the stamp, between the 2nd and 3rd bars, or the middle 2 bars of the postmark, you can see the numeral 1. And this is called a Doan postmark. The Doan postmarks were the first postmarks that were distributed to small post offices by the post office department with a regular basis. And for a long time, nobody knew what those numbers meant. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s are common. They're known up to 15, and I think even one's been found with a 32 in it. And it took for a long time to figure out what they meant. What were those numbers? People thought they might be like rural route numbers. No, they can't be, because there wasn't a rural route that operated out of Martin's Bluff. So postal historian Bill Hellbach, who was publisher of the La Posta Journal, realized that there was a correlation between postmaster compensation for the previous fiscal year and the time and the year in which the postmark was issued. So a postmark with a 1 in the number bars means that the post office postmaster was compensated between nothing and $100. If it had a 2, it would be between $100 and $200, and so on. Why did they do this? Well, the belief is that they wanted to see, since these were experimental postmarks to some extent, how well they would hold up, figuring that a postmark that had a 1 in the bars would be used a lot less than a postmark with a 5 in the bars, because the postmaster's compensation was directly tied to the volume of mail canceled at that post office. So this is what's called a Type 3 Doan with a 1 in the bars. Okay, next. Kalama. Here's the earliest postmark from Kalama, and Kalama was the subject of one of the articles in the fall issue of the Cowlitz Historical Quarterly about how there were actually 2 offices. This is the earliest postmark known from Kalama. It's from Kalama when it was at the current location. And it's kind of strange up there that it says discontinued January 25, 1871 and reestablished January 24. I won't go into the details and rehash why that happened. If you're curious, you can read the article about Kalama in the Cowlitz Historical Quarterly from last fall, and it give you all the answers and more. Next. This is the only known postmark from Pumphrey's Landing. It's on a Wells Fargo Frankton tire, although it probably wasn't used as an express cover. At the very top above the Wells Fargo Frank there, it reads Pumphrey W.T. April 22, 1872. It's a pretty ugly cover, but it's quite a rare one. Pumphrey's Landing is the same general location as the earlier Olaqua, about 8 miles north of Castle Rock on the west bank of the Cowlitz River. And the postmaster was William Pumphrey, and as this office as well as the earlier Olaqua. Next. Carrollton is on the Columbia River, 5 miles north of Kalama, and it originally was on the Northern Pacific Railroad. Operated in 3 periods. No postmarks are known from the first 2. The post office name was changed to Carroll's in 1915 to match the name of the railroad station. So we always had Carrollton Post Office at Carroll Station on the railroad. It's a different location than the current Carroll's PO, which we'll talk about when we get there. Next. Mount Coffin was on the Columbia River, about 1 mile downriver from the Lewis and Clark Bridge. The site is now within the Longview city limits. It was operated, and the post office was in a store operated by the Ladue family. It's spelled L-A space D-U with a capital L and a capital D. We'll talk more about that later. The settlement was named for a large rock on the riverbank that was a Native American burial site. Next. Lower Cowlitz is the 3rd and final office from which no postmarks are known. It was about 1.5 miles north of Kelso on the east bank of the Cowlitz River, and it was located at Cowlitz Station on the Northern Pacific Railroad. The Coweeman Post Office later operated at this location. Next. Silver Lake, on the north shore of Silver Lake, about 6 miles northeast of Castle Rock. The post office name was always officially 2 words, but interestingly, most postmarks show it as 1, including this example here. It operated in 2 periods. This was the last office discontinued in Cowlitz County in 1985, and no postmarks are known from the first short period. Next. This is a picture of the barn store that housed the Silver Lake Post Office. This dates from about 1912. The postmaster, Frank G. Barnes, was served in that capacity from 1893 to 1920. And as was typical for many small towns, the post office operated in a general store or some business that was in the town, with the idea that having a post office would attract people to come into that place of business. Next. Olyquaw, this one with an E. It's about 8 miles north of Castle Rock on the west bank of the Cowlitz River on the Northern Pacific Railroad. It's the same general location as the earlier Olyquaw and Pumphrey's Landing post offices. Next. Coweeman, about 1.5 miles north of Kelso on the east bank of the Cowlitz River. And we just mentioned it was the same location as the earlier lower Cowlitz post office, located at Cowlitz Station on the Northern Pacific Railroad. Next. Woodland. We all know where Woodland is. This was the subject of another of the articles that was in the fall Cowlitz Historical Quarterly. It's kind of weird that the office was established and then the name was changed to Kearns in October of 1890. Kearns operated until 1906. So how could the office be reestablished just 1 month later? Well, the answer to that is in my journal article. But the short answer is the post office was moved 1.5 miles up the Lewis River in about February 1890 and renamed Kearns in October. So once that office was renamed Kearns, Woodland Post Office was reestablished at the original location just 1 month later. Next. Toutle. Toutle at this time was at a different location than where the town of Toutle currently is. It was about 3 miles southeast of where Toutle currently is. This is dates from 1884, this postmark. So very early, the office was established in July of 83. Next. Jackson was on the west bank of the Cowlitz River at the mouth of Arkansas Creek. It's about 1.5 miles southwest of Castle Rock, operated in 2 periods. Okay, next. Sightly operated in 3 locations. The first was about 8 miles east of the Silver Lake Post Office at the postmaster's residence. And then in November 1885, it moved about 1 mile northwest to the residence of the new postmaster. And then in November of 1887, it moved about 3.5 miles north of that location and remained there until the office was discontinued in 1913. This is the earliest known postmark and the only known territorial example from Sightly. Washington became a state on November 11, 1889. So this was a year and a few months before then. Next. Stella. We all know where Stella is, about 11 miles west of Longview on the river. This was a very fancy box straight line postmark, very unusual. And that object to the right of the box is what's called a Wheel of Fortune killer. It kind of looks roughly like the old gambling Wheel of Fortune. This is a very unusual postmark. I've not seen this. I've seen Wheel of Fortune killers from many post offices, but I've not seen a box straight line like this from anywhere. Next. And the subject of my final article in the Cowlitz Historical Quarterly fall issue was the fire that destroyed the Stella Post Office on July 27, 1907. We earlier mentioned that manuscript postmarks were applied when the postmaster did not want to fork over the money to buy a postmarking device from some government manufacturer. And post office department wasn't supplying devices. This is a different horse, though. The Stella, this was called an emergency manuscript postmark. So in the fire of July 27, 1907, the store in which the post office was housed burned. Presumably, the postmarking device was lost in that fire. So there was still some semblance of a postal service at Stella. And so the postmaster postmarked this using a manuscript postmark. It was all he had at the time. This was just 3 days after the fire. And one of the things on this message, the last sentence reads, "I am at Oak Point, Washington." I don't know, but that could mean that the sender was displaced by the fire or affected by it in some other way. And this is the only example of this postmark that is known. Next. Shortly thereafter, Stella used what's called an emergency straight line postmark. So probably the postmaster procured this device locally. Somebody made it for him. And so it's a lot easier applying a rubber stamp than it would be to sign each one, sign and date each card. So there are two examples of this one though. This was from about 2 to 3 weeks after the office burned. Next. Tucker was on the Northern Pacific Railroad, about 3 miles south of Castle Rock. The community was also known as Stockport and Pleasant Hill. Next. Tower operated at several different homesteads about 12 miles northeast of Castle Rock in 2 periods. Next. Kelso, that's right over there. Kelso's post office was established December 11, 1886, and still continues to operate, of course. And here's a territorial example from Kelso. Next. Lexington is on the west side of the Cowlitz River, about 3 miles north of Longview. There's still a community, an unincorporated community called Lexington, but it hasn't had a post office since 1917. This is called a Dome Type 1 postmark, signified by 5 bars, 5 canceling bars over the stamp. There is probably can't see it on your presentation, but there was a 1 in bars. So Lexington was kind of a low volume office. These postmarks were distributed the Dome Type 1s were distributed to offices only in September and October of 1903, though many of them were used into the 1910s. Next. Kearns, kind of the second cousin to Woodland here. It was on the north bank of the Lewis River, about 1.5 miles northwest of downtown Woodland. It's now located within the Woodland city limits. And we mentioned earlier that the Woodland post office was moved to this location. Earlier in 1890, the name was then changed to Woodland in October, and the office was discontinued 16 years later. Next. Cable's is on the Columbia River, about 3 miles west of Woodland. This office operated 18 years, but postmarks are quite scarce from it. There are only 4 known, and one of those is a receiving postmark. So this envelope or cover doesn't look very pretty since it was opened rough at the right, but it's the best example of a Cable's postmark known. So there's got to be more of these out there since the office operated that long. Next. Catlin. Catlin is across the Cowlitz River from downtown Kelso. It's now within the Kelso city limits and is referred to as West Kelso. This cover bears 10 cents in postage, 2 5-cent stamps. That pays the first class mail rate up to 1 ounce, which at the time was 2 cents, plus the registration fee with no indemnity for 8 cents. So registered mail at the time, I mean, not everybody had access to checking accounts or money orders like we do now. So often registered mail was used to send cash through the mail. And so this was to some business in New York. So obviously this person in Catlin ordered something from this business and enclosed whatever amount of money that was in the envelope directly. Next. Sugar Creek, very short-lived office, less than a year. This is the only known example. And it's in the Toutle River Valley, about 13 miles northeast of Toutle. And what this is on the back of a document. Next. And here's the document. And basically what it says, that for Sugar Creek, that mail was supplied by special service from Toutle, about 13 miles southwest. Now this is somewhat of a puzzle to me because normally the postmaster would hire some local resident, and could even in some cases be the postmaster him or herself, to carry the mail between two offices on a special supply route. That person was compensated for that service. But here we have an agreement signed by 8 individuals, each to pay 50 cents per month to carry mail between Sugar Creek and Tootle. So instead of being paid, they're paying to get the mail delivered to Sugar Creek. The first signer, Samuel Crum, was the only Sugar Creek postmaster in the 11 months the office operated. And the 5th signer is Thomas Sugars, and that's likely the namesake of the creek and subsequently the post office, which was located about a quarter mile north of the creek. Next. St. Helen, the post office at Sugar Creek, moved about 2 miles south and was renamed St. Helen in 1893. It's on the north bank of the Tootle River, about 25 miles east of Castle Rock and about 2 miles south of the Sugar Creek post office, operated until 1936. Next. Ostrander is on the east side of the Cowlitz River on the railroad about 3 miles north of Kelso. Now this one, in previous envelopes, I've used like a black background to highlight them from the white of the slide, but this one I'm using yellow. What do you suppose that black border is for? Well, this is what's called a mourning cover. Somebody passed away, and so this was likely a letter of sympathy, and the black border was called a mourning cover that was used to indicate that this letter was directed to somebody whose family had sustained a loss. What I think though is the most amazing aspect of this envelope is it was postmarked in Ostrander, April 26, 1901, and it was received in Kennewick by virtue of a backstamp postmark the next day. It took 1 day to get from Ostrander to Kennewick. I had a letter to me from Tacoma last month take 8 days to get here. So, in some ways the post office has improved, but other ways it hasn't. Okay, next. Ladue. We mentioned earlier that the name of the family that ran the post office at Mount Coffin was the Ladue family, spelled as 2 words, L-A-D-U. And so in 1895, the Mount Coffin post office was renamed Ladue. The Ladue family operated a store that housed the Mount Coffin post office. And the Mount Coffin post office was renamed to preserve the Ladue family name, but the post office department officials simplified the name to 1 word. The name change did not occur until 1895. And why was that? Well, there was a post office with an identically sounding name in Lewis County spelled Ladue, L-A-D-E-W. And obviously you can't have 2 post offices spelled the same, but you can't even have 2 post offices whose names sound similarly enough, and these names sounded identical. So once the Ladue post office in Lewis County was discontinued in 1894, it freed up the name, and so then they were able to change the name in 1895. This letter bears 12 cents in postage, an 8-cent stamp, and 2 2-cent stamps. The 2-cent stamps pay first-class mail rate for up to 2 ounces, 4 cents, plus 8 cents for registration with no indemnity. Now down here, if you look on the right-hand side of the cover, you'll see a like annotation .60. I don't know if that's what somebody paid for this cover from a dealer, so they got a great bargain if they paid 60 cents for it, but more likely that was an annotation from the receiver that this envelope contains 60 cents in coin, hence why it was sent by registered mail. Next. Castle Rock. Well, here's an example from the time when the post office at Castle Rock was 1 word instead of the 2 words as it is now. So between 1895 and 1930, it was officially 1 word, even though most people and residents in the town still use the 2-word spelling. And this was just a postal simplification. You'll see some people using the 1-word spelling during this period, but most of them stuck with the 2-word. Only postmarks show it as 1 word. Next. Eufaula is on Cold Creek, about 12 miles northwest of downtown Longview. Next. Yale. The original site of Yale was on the north bank of the Lewis River, about 5 miles south of Cougar, and that site is now under Yale Lake. The post office in 1904 moved about 2.5 miles northwest to the current community of Yale, which is located about 2.5 miles north of the Lewis River. In 1940, the post office moved 6 miles northeast to the present site of Cougar. And then its name was changed to Cougar the next year in 1941. So the post office at Cougar actually was Yale for about roughly 1.5 years between 1940 and 1941. Next. Ariel, the original site of Ariel was on the north bank of the Lewis River, about 5 miles northeast of the present Ariel post office, and this site is now under Lake Merwin. The post office moved to the present site in 1929 to provide postal service to workers on the Ariel Dam project, plus the fact that the old site was going to be underwater pretty quickly. The unofficial site move may have been as early as 1927. Next. Litho operated in 2 locations, about 15 miles northeast of Silver Lake, just north of the locality now known as Kidd Valley, and just south of the Lewis County line. Next. Cougar operated in 3 periods, okay, 1902 to 1903, the Yale, and then 1906 to 1936. But then in 1940, as we just mentioned, the Yale post office was moved to the site of Cougar, and the post office name was changed from Yale to Cougar in August of 1941. Next. Elk Creek, quite a scarce item. This is the only postmark known from Elk Creek. It's on the north side of the North Fork of the Toutle River, about near the mouth of Elk Creek, about 19 miles east-southeast of Toutle. And that's also about 1.5 miles southwest of the Elk Rock viewpoint on the Spirit Lake Highway. The site was within the 1980 Mount St. Helens blast zone, so anything that was left of the community was probably destroyed in 1980. There probably wasn't anything left to begin with. This office operated for 5 years, and it was, as you might imagine, given its remoteness, did not have a large volume of mail. Hence, this is the only known example. Next. Reno, not the one in Nevada, but the community on the north bank of the Lewis River, about 8 miles northeast of Woodland and 3 miles west of Ariel. Next. And this is the building that housed the Reno post office circa 1915. And like when we showed the view of the Silver Lake post office, it was located in a store. That's an awfully big building for a post office, but probably operated in a small cubbyhole within the general store. Next. Pigeon Springs is on the south side of the Kalama River, out the mouth of Gobar Creek, about 13 miles northeast of Kalama. It was the site of a rustic resort and hotel adjacent to Mineral Springs. But access from Kalama was costly and difficult, contributing to the demise of the enterprise. Next. And here's a bunch of happy campers on the footbridge between what is now the Kalama River Road on the left-hand side to the resort over on the right-hand side of the river, and that bridge is still there. I wouldn't cross it though. Next. Carroll's, the original site was on the Columbia River, about 5 miles north of Kalama on the Northern Pacific Railroad. Recall it was earlier known as Carrollton. In April 1915, it was shortened to Carroll's to match the name of the railroad station. Moved to its current location on the Old Pacific Highway and the Carroll's Country Store in 1929 or 1930. Next. Mount Solo, about 5 miles west of Longview on Coal Creek Slough. Served a logging camp of the Inman Paulson Lumber Company, and the post office was in the company store. Next. Okay, pop quiz number 2. When was Longview founded? Okay, anybody want to, I'll give you a hint.
1923.
I was gonna say, I'll give you a hint. Next year's the centennial. 1923, right? Next. Easy question, right? Okay, next. I'll explain this. Does anybody have any ideas? There's a 1916 postmark from Longview. Danielle, if you want to open it up to chat here, if anybody wants to.
Anyone who can answer right now can unmute themselves and answer. I actually know the answer, and I knew it beforehand, so it's not fair for me to answer, but anyone who wants to can unmute themselves and answer.
Any thoughts on this one?
Somebody named themselves Longview and they weren't. I don't know.
Well, that's close. That's close. You're on the right track. And the year date of 1916 isn't correct. The postmaster here in Longview did not put the wrong date slogan in the postmark. So the date is correct. All right, well, let's go on, and then we'll, if you want to mute back Danielle, and we'll go on and explain it. Well, there was a Longview post office established in Benton County in May 1911. And it was a small flag stop on the railroad, and the post office served just 3 families within a 1.5 mile radius. Now we know R.A. Long planned Longview, and he preferred the name Longview as a choice of 4 or 5 proposed names for his planned city. But the planners were unaware that there was a post office in Benton County with the same name. So what do you do when something like that happens? You hire a lawyer. So they engaged a law firm to find a way to obtain the official use of the name Longview. Well, they reached an agreement. The Benton County Longview postmaster, his name was Roy Kleinfelter, agreed to change the name of his post office in exchange for construction of a covered platform to protect the mailbag from wet weather. And by this we mean, if you may have seen it in old movies or something, there was like a post that the outgoing mail sack will be hung on. And when the train comes by, a guy uses like a hook and grabs it off the container and brings it right into the train for sorting. So that's what he was complaining, that his mail always got wet. So they agreed that they would pay him to build one of those platforms. And he estimated it would cost about $25. So in other words, we used the technique that is called the Bribe, and that is spelled B-R-I-B-E. The Longview Post Office in Benton County, then its name was changed to Barger in November 1922, which opened up the availability of the Longview name for our Longview here in Cowlitz County. Next. This is the earliest postmark known from Longview. It's on a water-soaked postcard, unfortunately. Longview Post Office opened January 2nd of 1923. This example is I should say it was established on that date. This example dates 25 days later from January 27. The Daily News states the post office began operations on July 16. So here we have a case when the post office was established effective January 2nd, 23, but it didn't actually begin operations until a few days later. Next. Riderwood was the last post office established in Cowlitz County, still operates today. This is the earliest known postmark from Riderwood. The 12 cents in postage, pays the first class mail for up to 1 cent, to 1 ounce for 2 cents, and the registration with $50 indemnity for 10 cents. Next, rural free delivery, Castle Rock. Okay, this is what's called a down the line marking. The rural free delivery system was established in 1896 by the Post Office Department to try, most larger cities, especially in some smaller cities, would have free delivery within the city, but outlying areas, people would still have to go into the post office and get their mail. Well, rural free delivery was the post office's attempt, a very successful one, started in 1896. The first Washington RFD route was out of North Yakima in 1897. And Castle Rock was one of several post offices in Cowlitz County. I think there were 4 or 5, but Castle Rock is the only Cowlitz County post office from which RFD markings are known. Now, how do you know that's an RFD marking? Well, most RFD routes ran from a post office at point A to some outgoing point B back to point A. Other ones would start at point A at the post office, make a loop trip, and come back and end at the post office again. So if a patron mailed something to a recipient who was further down the line of the RFD, rather than have that letter taken back to the post office, postmarked, and then delivered on the route the next day, the rural free delivery carrier would actually apply a manuscript postmark to cancel the stamp, and then he would deliver it to that person on that same day. Can you imagine same day mail delivery anymore? We know this is an RFD marking because down at the bottom of the address on the postcard, right below where it says Castle Rock, Washington, it says RFD number 1. So this recipient was down farther on the RFD route from the place where this was sent. And the postmark is implied in indelible pencil, and you probably can't see it too well from the slide, but it reads CR1, meaning Castle Rock 1. Sometimes they would just like draw an X or scribble through the stamp. So this is a type of an RFD postmark where they had some indication of the post office name as well. Castle Rock RFD ran along the east side of the Cowlitz River. Next. Contract stations. Contract stations were not staffed by postal employees, but rather by employees of the business in which they were located. Sometimes the owner of the business, sometimes there was a dedicated clerk to it, with the idea that if the business contained a post office, it would bring more people into the business to take advantage of the postal services, a more convenient neighborhood location instead of going all the way to the main post office for that town. Kelso had 3 stations, and here's where they operated. Station 1 operated in those years, Station 2 next, and Station 3 next. Here's an envelope postmarked at Longview Station 1. Now, this is a registered letter, and the post office regulation for canceling stamps on registered letters was that they could not use a regular postmark. They had to use what's called a mute killer, or a blob of some sort that canceled the stamp. And then the postmark was applied on the reverse of the envelope over where the envelope was sealed. And that was thought of so it would provide evidence if somebody tampered with the envelope en route. Well, the clerk at the Longview Station 1 was nice enough on this example from a postal history standpoint to apply a postmark on the left-hand side. It says Longview, Washington, and then in parentheses at the bottom, station number 1. At this time, Station 1 was located at 1350 Commerce, and the envelope is mailed at Montgomery Ward store, which was 1334 Commerce. It's just a couple of blocks, or a couple buildings right down the street. And as you might guess, that would be a lot more convenient for somebody mailing something from Montgomery Ward rather than going over to the post office where it is now. This is an interesting rate at here. It bears 51 cents in postage. First class mail up to 1 ounce for 3 cents. Registration between $50 and $75, indemnity for 25 cents. And a return receipt showing the address where this was delivered for 23 cents. Total 51 cents. These stations are sometimes called substations. That is an incorrect term. Substation was something else, but in local literature and advertisements, you'll generally see these indicated as post office substations. That's just wrong. Next. So here's the contract stations that operated in Longview. Station 1, we just saw an example, and at that time, this office was located in Gunderson's Rexall Drugstore at 1350 Commerce. Station 2, next. And Station 3, located in 2 different locations, as did Station 4. Station 5 was 1 location only. Next. Now, you notice that those contract stations all had numbers, station number 1, station number 2, etc. Well, in the 1980s, the Post Office Department, or the Postal Service by this time, discontinued the use of numbered stations, and instead of calling them contract stations, they called them contract postal units, or CPUs. And they would name them after the business in which it was located. So the one at CNL Licensing on 14th Avenue is still operating. It's been there since 2011, but there were 4 other CPUs operating within Longview. And if anybody has any information on these or can remember the post office that operated there, I'd like to know about it. So let's talk afterwards or email me. Next. And as Joseph mentioned at the beginning, I'm currently working on a postmark catalog as part of a book on Cowlitz County postal history. And what a postmark catalog does, it lists all postmarks known from that particular post office, including the earliest known and latest known usage of each. So here we see Lexington. This is one of the more complete examples. We have 4 postmarks known. 27 millimeter circular date stamp, followed by a dome, followed by 2 4-bars. Yeah, and next. All right. So if you want to open up the floor, Danielle, we can do so.
Thank you guys so much. Yes, everyone can unmute themselves and go ahead and ask questions. Ask away.
I noticed one of the, this is Bob Chase. And I noticed one of the cancellations for Longview looked like it was spelled with 2 words.
You caught that. You are absolutely right. And the office was always officially known as used 1-word spelling. That was just an error when the Post Office Department created that device. And so that particular type C 4-bar postmark was used for about a year. A more heavy duty postmark where Longview was spelled as 1 word is known as early as January of 1924. So that's just an error on the Post Office Department. And I guess the letters were inset into the dial, and they decided, whoever made that postmark decided that Longview was 2 words. That's the only reference I've ever seen where it's 2 words. In all the post office department literature, it's always 1 word. When I found that postmark, I had not seen that type before. And I thought that maybe it was 2 words officially originally, but no, I went and searched through all the official records, and it's always 1 word.
In Portland, Oregon, I noticed back in the 1800s, it just said Portland, Oregon, and by the 20s there were streets.
Yes.
Have you ever noted when were there enough people in Portland that you had to have a street number?
But the post office would encourage street delivery to larger cities as early as like the 1870s and 1880s. By 1900s, the early 1900s, if you addressed a letter just to Portland, Oregon, 1 of 2 things would happen. If the postmaster or carriers, none of the carriers knew that person, it would go back to the dead letter office or return to the sender if there was a return address. If they did know that where it was, they had a very obtrusive purple rubber stamp that would say, address your mail to street and number.
Yeah.
To try to give you the idea of it, okay? But yeah, you are correct. And the earliest uses that I've seen from Cowlitz County is I have an 1881, I think, envelope from Castle Rock, and I don't recall where it's addressed to, and it basically has a rubber stamp that says, have your mail addressed to street number.
There's a question in the chat box that says, in today's dollars, how much would the latest postage rates of 51 cents be?
Okay, well, there's 2 ways we can answer that. One of the ways I like to think about the current value of money is in the rate to mail a first class letter in 1940 was 3 cents. And today it's 58 cents. So that's a 19-fold increase. There's a pretty good correlation between the time value of money and postage rate. So you can figure roughly 20 times the amount. And so 51 cents, I'd roughly be $10. I think registration now, if I'm not mistaken, the minimum fee is like $12.75 or something like that. And a return receipt would cost you another, I'm thinking probably $2 or $3. So the postage rate to mail something similar to that would be roughly $15. And I suspect that envelope contained, somebody owed Montgomery Ward some money. So they wanted the letter sent by registered mail to prove it was sent. And they had a return receipt to make sure that the person got it. Well, he never claimed it at the post office. So it went right back to Monkey Ward's.
Another question just came in. Do maps exist for the rural delivery routes?
No, I don't believe there are any maps that exist, but in the postal bulletins, it will describe that the route went from this office to that office to that office. And while there are no maps per se, you can get a pretty good indication of how the route went. And it will also show the time that the carrier's routes between the time he left the post office and returned, either by going up or back or on a circular loop route, generally ran between 4 and 8 hours. And the classic rural delivery, you see a horse-drawn wagon with, rural delivery. And in fact, I don't see Tim Boardman on tonight, but he wrote a great article for the Pacific Northwest Postal Histories quarterly journal on rural free delivery in Washington. And he had some great pictures in there of the rural free delivery carriers. Okay. I did mention that I'm working on a catalog of all Cowlitz County postmarks. So if any of you have any envelopes, they don't even have to be older envelopes, even like the 1980s and 90s is great. Postmarked in any Cowlitz County office, post office, operator or not, or information on any of those contract stations and contract postal units that I talked about, I would definitely like to see that material. And my email address is my name, Ted Gruber, all one word, at AOL.com. Just get in touch with me, and I would be glad to credit your contributions when the catalog is published, and hopefully it can extend the usage dates of some of the either new postmark types that I've not yet documented, or extend the usage dates for some that I have. As of now, I have documented, I think, about 275 postmarks used in Cowlitz County from the earliest 1853 to 2010.
I'm Mila Cad. I have some postcards, so I will have to look at the dates. One was addressed or has Catlin on it.
Okay.
And I'm thinking there might be one from Ladue as well. But I do have a question because my grandparents homesteaded and mail came to Kelso, but now we are Longview. But of course, they never moved. So when did the mail delivery change to Longview from Kelso?
I believe that Kelso and Longview always had, they've always had independent post offices supplying mail to the respective cities.
But
Longview,
so the boundary must have changed.
Oh, well, the boundary is generally the Cowlitz River, except for the part of, I mean, Catlin, the town of Catlin existed before Longview.
Right.
And so Catlin was incorporated into the city of Kelso and was unofficially called West Kelso starting in 1907. So that part of town would have been served first by the Catlin post office, which received mail from the Kelso post office across the river. And then after Catlin was discontinued in 1909, it would have received mail from the Kelso post office. And one of the things that is quite interesting that I kind of glossed over on the contract stations, does anybody remember a mall called Park and Shop that ran in the 1950s in Longview? Does anybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Park and Shop, the advertisements, they had like full page advertisements in daily news. It was like what we would call today a strip mall. And Park and Shop, they didn't give an address, but they said located on the Longview Kelso city boundary. Well, they were not lying. The city boundary between Kelso and Longview still does go right through those stores.
Right.
And so the address of the stores, because they faced the street that they faced was in Longview, but the back of the building was in Kelso. One of those stores in the Park and Shop contained Longview Station number 2. But the post office itself was actually located in that part of the building that was in Kelso. And in the 1950s, there was quite a debate between the two cities to try to change the boundary to eliminate this confusion, among other things, but it never did change. So the city limits, so there used to be an old Office Max store there, and the Kelso Longview boundary went right through that store, and it still does. So that's interesting. That contract station where the post office was actually located not within the city of its parent office, Longview in this case. To me, that's the only case I've ever seen of that anywhere in the country. So that's kind of an unusual anomaly. Any other questions or comments?
What role the local governments have in the appointment of postmasters, given that it was a federal institute?
Well, the postmasters were appointed by the post office department, but when a community wanted a post office, they would send in what's called an application for a post office, of all things. And this was filled out by the postmaster of the nearest office to that city, or in later years by the proposed postmaster themselves. So it was signed, it was filled out, and the application would contain information like what's the name of the office, where is it located, in which section, range, and township. Sometimes a map would be supplied from varying detail, from very crude to very detailed. If it's located on any creeks, rivers, railroads, if it's located on an existing postal route, if not, how would the mail be supplied? They have to answer all these types of questions. And then it would be signed by the proposed postmaster and verified by the postmaster of a very close post office. So in Longview, the proposed postmaster, when the office was established, was Westy Vandercook, and you probably know the name of that from the street. Okay. Well, he was the chief engineer for the Long Bell Company. And even though he was Longview postmaster in official capacity, he really probably didn't tend to the postmaster's day-to-day duties. And by 1924, the next postmaster of Longview replaced him. So the postmasters did have to go through an appointment process, and there would be cases when a postmaster did not qualify, for whatever reason, and they could either propose a new postmaster or the office would simply be rescinded. That is just was officially discontinued before it ever operated. Hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Ted,
Yeah.
I have to say, I loved, even though it was so fast, you're so efficient. You have to be efficient because you're dealing with huge numbers. But I loved reading the destinations of those postcards and
Yeah.
letters, and also those messages. Sometimes we just get a glimpse, but one person said, "How are you after that party? I'm just still recovering."
Makes you
You know,
wonder. Yeah.
I know, but I think that, and some of them went to Maine and New York. I didn't see any international destinations, but there was everything from the next town over to across the country. I just, the Postal Service, I think the Postal Service is astounding and amazing. And
it's a good observation. And it was, even though they handled a lot less volume of mail, they were a lot less, they had a lot more attention to detail and were much more efficient than they are today.
I think so. Several years ago, I realized that if I threw my letter in the box, it wouldn't necessarily get a postmark. And so I started asking, will you stamp this and postmark this? Some people do, some places still do not.
If you present an envelope to a post office, now a contract station or a CPU, they kind of don't know the postal laws and regulations as well. But by law, if you present an envelope to the postmaster, you're mailing in your tax return, let's say, and it's April 15th. If you hand it to the clerk and say, please postmark this, they will apply a postmark with that date on it.
I think it's important. I think it's important. I think it's a wonderful tracking device. And I applaud your immense effort. And
thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really something. I can't remember. I see an email. Where do you live?
I live between Kelso and Kalama. I actually Upper Carroll's, I guess.
I didn't know that. Okay, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
I'll point out, make a couple of other observations to what Janelle just said there, is that today, if you mail a letter from Longview, and this is typical from areas throughout the country, it will not get a Longview postmark. The mail goes uncanceled, in our case, to what's called a sectional center, which is Portland.
Right, Portland,
Okay.
exactly.
And then the mail is canceled in Portland. So even if I'm mailing a letter from Longview to Longview, even from one post office box to another, it'll go to Portland and it'll go back to Longview. Okay.
Right. I know.
And about the postcards, from about 1906 to 1915 is what is called the postcard era. And it only cost a penny to mail a postcard then. It's 40 cents now, if I recall. But postcards were like emails at the time. I mean, for 1 cent, you could deliver a message across the country or to your next door neighbor, or in the case of that Castle Rock, to somebody living farther down the RFD route for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I applaud our postal system myself. I appreciate it very much. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah, as much grief as they get, they do a darn good job in most cases.
It's in the world, we are the only postal system that delivers from a place, a door to door.
Yeah. And of major countries, we also have the least expensive postage rates.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a friend from California who went over to Denmark, and to mail a postcard from back to the States from Denmark, he said cost him like $4 per page. And I think it's like $1.20 or $1.30 to mail a postcard from here to Denmark.
Looking forward to your book.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah.
I just have to finish it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Are the records about making the postmasters or their approval, do those still exist?
They do. They were originally handwritten in longhand in large ledger books. And what they would do is they would show when a postmaster was appointed, it would list his name and the date he was appointed. Then when the next postmaster appointed, on the same line, you would have that postmaster, the new postmaster, and the date he was appointed, and so on down the line. These ledger books were then microfilmed in like the 1960s. So that was postal historians' first access to these records. Now they're online through the National Archives for all 50 states. So you can go to the National Archives. It's not the most intuitive website of all, but you can get access to all of the postmaster appointment records for any post office in the United States. Those were discontinued in 1971, the postmaster appointment records. So, but as we saw in that graph, not a lot of stuff has happened in postal history in terms of post offices being established and discontinued since 1971.
My grandpa was appointed postmaster of Longview in 1936.
What was his name?
Clinton Byers.
Okay, I recognize the name. I don't recall when he served, but I recognize the name when I was looking at postmaster research. So if you want to drop me an email, I can send you a copy of the postmaster appointment records page where we'll have his name and the date he assumed service, and then the next postmaster. So again, if you just want to email me at tedgruber@aol.com, I'll be glad to send that to you.
Sweet. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And tell me what you want to when you send
Yeah.
it. Okay. And I'll get that to you shortly.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, Danielle, I met your objective of getting to the Willy Wonka slide by 8 o'clock there. So.
I do appreciate that very much. So
All right.
thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Very much. And thank you so much, Ted, for your wonderful presentation and clearly your vast knowledge on the subject. I'm sure we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg.
And I'll point out too, Danielle, in case somebody didn't miss it, the presentation tonight was recorded. Mm-hmm. So it'll be up through the Cowlitz County Museum's website at some point. And so if you want to take a look and read some of those other messages on the cards or where they were directed, or spend a little more time looking at them than I was allowed to tonight, it will be available for you to view at your leisure.
And Ted, keep us posted, keep me posted, and we'll get the word out about any updates regarding your book and its publication.
I will sure do that, Joseph. Yeah. And I've got some stuff I want to talk about with Bill too. So I'll be probably sometime later this month, I'll be dropping him an email and I'll copy you on it.
All right. Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Well, Ted, thanks again. That was an awesome presentation. That
was
incredible information there. You know, you got the mail service geography is mixed into it too, which I like a lot. And it's I'm really can't wait to see your book when it comes out.
Well, thanks. Appreciate that, Joseph.
All right.
I thank you for your attention and giving me the opportunity to talk about postal history. It's kind of a passion of mine, and some envelopes that are in my possession or in the collections of others. So thanks again, everybody.
All right. And thanks everybody for coming tonight. Remember, last Thursday is our next program on the 31st, last day of the month. We'll see you there. Take care and have a good night, everybody. And thank you again, Ted. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
All right.
Good night, all.
Good night.